Um, I came to Indiana University Bloomington as a sophomore. That was in 1969. I had spent my first year at IU Southeast, and at that time it was in Jeffersonville, Indiana. It didn't have the nice campus that it has now. It was in some old courthouse buildings in Jeffersonville. But anyway, I came to IU Bloomington in '69 and finished my undergrad degree in 1972. Immediately went into a graduate program for a master's degree, partly because at that point in time there was a glut of teachers, and my degree was in education. So I started a master's degree in reading, now called language education, but it was called reading at that point in time in the School of Ed, and did my coursework in a year, and then I got a job. I didn't want to leave Bloomington like a lot of students come to IU. I didn't want to leave, and I was hired as a high-energy physics secretary in the physics department. And at that point in time, the labor laws were such that you didn't have to pay people overtime if they worked over 40 hours. And so I worked in physics during the day, and I found out that I could tutor over in the athletics department at night, and that's what I did. And that was my first foray into athletics. You know, it was really interesting because my freshman year, very quickly realized that I didn't want to stay and finish my degree at IU Southeast because it was like glorified high school. And it didn't really feel like a college campus. They didn't have a campus at that time. They just had buildings. So I very much wanted to come to IU Bloomington. And I'd had a taste of it in high school because I was the editor of my yearbook, high school yearbook. And IU ran yearbook institutes and journalism institutes in the summertime. So I had been up here for a week during the summer between my junior and senior years doing the yearbook institute and fell in love with the place. Not that I needed much convincing because both my grandparents were graduates of master's degrees. And it actually, my grandfather was a principal and my grandmother had to teach outside of the Bloomington system, but she was a teacher about the time that I was born. So I have connections with IU that, you know, go way back. But anyway, the first thing that came up was IU drastically increased its tuition rates, like over 100%, from 1968 to '69. And they called for a strike, and it was just the beginning of the things that were to come. And so it was being played up a lot in the press down around, I'm from southern Indiana, obviously, going to Southeast. And the best thing that ever happened for me to be able to come to Bloomington and go to school that next year was IU has a Founders Day ceremony in the spring where they honor students who make good grades, and I was a pretty good student. So I was invited to come to the Bloomington campus for the Founders Day program. And I was the first child in the family. My parents really believed in education. So we thought this was a big deal, so we decided to come. And even though there was all these newspaper articles about all this bad stuff that was going on at Bloomington, we did come. And it was nothing. I mean, and that was a good thing because I think had my parents not come for that and seen that things could get blown out of proportion, they might have worried about me when I did come to Bloomington in 1969. So that first year that I was here, of course, there was a lot of things happening in the world and the United States at that point in time. And of course, Vietnam was a very big thing. A lot of people, a lot of students were protesting, and frankly, there were a lot of students at school in order to not have to go to Vietnam because you could get a student deferment. So I don't think IU had any trouble with enrollment figures at that point in time. So my first year here was when, and I was living in a dorm. I lived in Forest, and that was the year of the Tet Offensive, and Kent State, and 4 dead in Ohio, and all that going on. And the interesting thing is we had our share of protests and demonstrations, and we had a very politically active president and vice president at that point in time. So the interesting thing, and this is the thing that kind of made me mad, all of the media at that point in time played up all of the violence that happened at Kent State and other campuses, and this campus staged an absolutely beautiful demonstration, a march to Dunn Meadow in the evening, candlelight. Started out on my end of campus, and people joined together and went to Dunn Meadow. It was very moving. I had already lost some friends who in Vietnam who had gone right out of high school or a little older than me and had already lost their lives. So it was very personal to us because people were losing their lives. And I did not see the media coverage of the nice, peaceful demonstrations. And I know that IU wasn't alone. I think our administration at that time, particularly Chancellor Byram Carter, did a real good. There was a lot of rumors and stuff roaming around campus. You know how rumors spread like wildfire. And there were rumors that our vice president of the student body was a Black Panther. And there were rumors that, of course, at that point in time, and it wasn't very long, I don't think, after the black young lady was killed in Martinsville. And Martinsville, I'm sorry, had a very bad reputation, sometimes still does, about their feelings about people of color. And so there were all these rumors flying around campus that the National Guard was waiting to come in, partly because it was happening on other campuses and not very far away. And so it was kind of a scary time. They also did call for a student body strike. And this shows you how focused I was at the time. At that point in time, I was a math major. Okay. And I don't know if you know anything about math majors in college, but you don't miss class unless you're a math genius. And I was not a math genius. So I felt like I could not miss class no matter what, because I wanted to do the best that I could. And I remember talking to people who were outside of all the activists, who were outside of all of the buildings, trying to convince students not to go to class. And I remember having this one conversation with somebody saying, I believe in what you believe in, but you don't understand. I'm a math major. I have to go to class. So, and they did chain doors shut at, that's about the most violent thing they did that I remember, a couple places in Ballantyne Hall. But I just thought we demonstrated the very best about America, that you have a right to your opinion and that you have the right to gather and to demonstrate about something that you believe in. And that's what IU demonstrated, and I hope we will continue to have that happening, because right now it's kind of scary that may not be an opportunity to do something without retribution. And that really does scare me, having lived through the time that I did live through. That was prior to, because that I don't know exactly how long they took, but I can understand why that might have been an issue, because it was at the time that they were drastically increasing tuition. Between my freshman and sophomore year in college, I believe it was like 100% or more increase in tuition. It was the beginning of the slowly creeping up, tuition. And like I said, that first year, they did stage a strike to protest that. And it wouldn't have surprised me that Assembly Hall might have been part of the funding and part of the reasons that they used for justifying, increasing the tuition so much at that point in time. It also probably, I would have to go back and do my history checking, but it's probably the time at which the state funding for public education started to go down, and has kept on going down, down, down since that point in time. So I'm not surprised to hear that, but I was not really aware, that the students did, protest that. I think the interesting thing is I do think it did what it became a kind of, it's a unique place that's part of this campus very much. And I think that it speaks to the fact that instead of imploding it and rebuilding something else, they chose to do something that was much more difficult and probably more expensive to try to preserve the best parts of it. And when they did the recent addition, because it is kind of an iconic part of this campus. Yes, and I didn't see much of it because most of my classes and whatever were focused on the south side of campus. And after my first year here, it was kind of the thing. That was kind of the period of anti-fraternities and sororities. They were almost closing because nobody wanted to be part of that. But it was also a time when a lot of students lived off campus. And so I lived off campus the last 2 years of my undergraduate career on the south side of campus. So in order to come to Assembly Hall or the north side, I either had to take the bus because I didn't have a car, or walk, and that was a pretty far piece. So, and at that point in time, they were doing the basketball games in the indoor field house, and it was my sophomore year, I think, between my freshman and sophomore year, that they decided, the fire marshals decided there weren't enough exits in the field house for the number of people that they were allowing to get into the field house. And so they drastically cut down the number of people that could sit, in the and watch a basketball game in the indoor field house. So I wasn't able to get tickets as a student, as a sophomore or a junior, because they just weren't enough tickets, and you had to have more seniority in order to do that. 71, 72 would have been my senior year as an undergrad, and that's when they opened dedicated Assembly Hall. And the first event that was in Assembly Hall was a Bob Hope, Petula Clark concert, and I went to that. I was able that year, my senior year in undergrad, to get tickets. At that point in time, the way they did it with students was you got some good seats and some not so good seats. And you could kind of pick which, I think they gave you like 3 different package choices or whatever, so that you kind of have some control over where you got your better seats than others. But I remember after being one time in the balcony, which does have a very weird kind of feeling, because you feel like you're pitching forward when you're in there. And so after experiencing that once, maybe I can't remember exactly where I sat for the Bob Hope Petula Clark, but I'm sure I got one of the cheaper seats, so it might have been in the balcony. But after experiencing the balcony the first time, I decided, and you could tell them this, I always wanted to be on the last row of the balcony when I had to have balcony seats. Because you didn't have to walk down and feel like you were going to pitch over the side. So I saw several games from the last row of the balcony in Assembly Hall that senior year. And like I say, that was the first opportunity that I had as a student to get tickets. Because I think before, the way they handled it when they reduced the number of seats is they just gave students fewer opportunities to get tickets. Like you could only get tickets for 3 or 4 games or something like that, so they could spread it around when the numbers were restricted. Initially, I think it was the first couple of things that I went to. It was a big arena, and it was new and it was cool and it was different. I think it was unique in its design. I think there were only, I could be wrong, but I think there were only 2 buildings built like that with a suspension roof and whatever. And of course, the idea behind that was that way you didn't have any freestanding arches or posts or anything to get in the way of your view. So, I just thought it was cool because it was neat. And they started holding graduation there. I graduated from and I was one of not very many people, not as many people went through graduation at that point in time, again, because of the times and whatever. But my grandmother had helped finance my education, and she had broken her hip during my senior year and worked really, really hard to get rehabbed back to a point where she could come to my graduation. So I felt obligated to go through my graduation ceremony, and that was kind of cool. At that point in time, you walk down the ramp. There's a service ramp that gives you access to the basement, and the graduates would walk in then and file in. That's how we did it. And that year, it was, early May, and there was a tornado warning, and I believe a tornado not very far away from Bloomington. So it was kind of a interesting, exciting graduation experience because they weren't sure if the tornado was going to come to Bloomington and exactly what they were going to do with all these people trying to get into the arena to see graduation and whatever. So it was just a building. But that also year was the first year that Coach Knight was the coach. And, of course, he had immediate success. And this is a basketball crazy state. And this university already had really, huge basketball tradition because of Branch McCracken and fine players and whatever that had happened prior to his coming. So it just, I would say Coach Knight and Assembly Hall grew up together. His fame, that it was the second year, I think it was, that we went to the Final Four with Steve Downing. Georgia McGinnis went pro that year before my senior year when they heard Coach Knight was going to be the coach. Steve stayed, and we immediately started having some huge iconic confrontations against UCLA and other big teams, and the mystique of the arena just grew as the basketball success grew. And it was a kind of a unique looking place, I think. So that, and at that point in time, all of our games were televised. So, people got to see the arena. And during those times, there was an electricity that you would feel, a buzz, if you will, that you would feel when you came into the arena on the day of a game, especially, as the crowd was coming in right prior to the game. It was an anticipation, an excitement. I called it a buzz. I've felt it a few other times. Obviously, having worked as long as I have in athletics, I've gone to a lot of athletics events in a lot of places. And the only other thing I can compare it to was I have gone to an away game for football at Michigan. And at that point in time, they had 102,000 capacity. Now it's even more than that. But there was a kind of a dull roar that would happen when you were out in the parking lot getting ready to go into that arena. And part of it is just the noise that collectively 102,000 people make when they're all tailgating and getting their stuff together and whatever. But it was just kind of a buzz, a roar in the background that you would feel, an excitement kind of thing. Well, we had that same kind of excitement in Assembly Hall. And it wasn't just for the big games. It was every single game that was being played. Because, of course, very, very quickly in 73, 74, we lost one ball game that year. And that was on the way to going to the NCAA. We lost to Kentucky at Dayton. And that's another day for another story. But, because I was at that ball game. But then the next year, the 75, 76 year, was when we went undefeated. And so every single game became important, no matter who you played or whatever, because the standards were set really high. You were, everybody was trying to win every single game. And we, achieved that in 75, 76. So for a very long time, probably a decade or more, those kinds of expectations were there all the time, every season, and every game was important. And you had that kind of electricity or excitement. Now, I would say we can achieve that at Assembly Hall now, but it's not every game. It's the big games. Tonight is a big game. We're going to play Purdue. So that excitement, that little buzz, the electricity will be there. But it's not there every single game the way it was back then. There's too many to just pick one favorite. I will say this was kind of impressive to me. And I may not have the year right exactly, so I'm not going to say the year. The men's basketball team had been, very, very successful. And, of course, the tradition is to gather at Assembly Hall when the team returns from their success or whatever. Well, that year, the women's team also was very successful, and the coach at that point in time was Tara Vandiver, who went on to very great fame and still is coaching at Stanford. And the women had been very successful too. And when they had the celebration ceremony at Assembly Hall, they had both the men's team and the women's team, gather in the middle, stretch out the whole entire floor, and allowed the students and whoever showed up in Assembly Hall to honor them. And that was kind of a cool moment. But there are too many exciting, wonderful moments. I mean, it's even hard to pick out one every year. And there's just too many, It's a place where that kind of thing happens, And and that's not limited to just basketball games, because in the early days, there were a lot of concerts. I think maybe they had gotten some probably federal state funding, so they had to show that they were using the arena for other purposes, not just basketball. That's why the graduation was there and why the concerts were there. So I've seen many wonderful concerts, the Beach Boys, John Denver, you know, really wonderful concerts, over time. And it was kind of cool working in Assembly Hall because one time Neil Diamond was getting ready to start a big tour, and I guess maybe he rented out the place or whatever for a week, and they practiced what his tour show was going to be, and they set up and whatever, and so we got a free concert every day from Neil Diamond, listening to them practice and get their sound checks right and all that kind of cool stuff. So one of the little perks of working in a place like that. Well, for people of Indiana who are so nuts about basketball, and I'm from Indiana, born in southern Indiana. My grandfather was a basketball coach, won one sectional in his lifetime. He didn't coach that long because he was mostly a principal. But, my grandmother was an avid fan. People grow up loving basketball, and they really appreciate basketball success. And we've had a lot of wonderful success. Not to mention a lot of wonderful kids that played the game. And I think we kind of took pride in the fact that we tried to play the game the right way. Tried not to, in the early 60s, IU was made an example for the rest of the NCAA. They found some, and having been in compliance for part of my career, what they got the men's football team on violations for the NCAA is so minor today that it would be laughed at. It would be considered a very minor violation, and nothing would have happened. But the word was that they were after Branch McCracken and the basketball team because they were very successful. But they couldn't find anything to get them on, so they found these minor violations on football. And they put Indiana University's entire athletics teams on probation for 4 years. That meant that, and we had some wonderful teams that weren't just basketball teams. There was Doc Councilman's swimming teams. At that point in time, we lost the opportunity to win 4 NCAA championships, which we would have done hands down in men's swimming because of that probation that they put us on to teach all the rest of the NCAA institutions not to cheat. So all it did was make Indiana very, very wary of, not following the rules and doing anything the wrong way. So it taught Indiana a lesson, but I don't think it taught the rest of the NCAA anything because that's about power and money. And so I think it's not just basketball success. It's also winning the right way with good people, with people that you would want to know. And having worked with student athletes for almost 40 years, they run the gamut just like the regular population. Not everybody's wonderful. But for the most part, we've been very fortunate to have great student athletes at this institution. Good students, people who care about their being a student, and that makes you proud. I think it makes you even more proud that you're successful, but you're also doing it the right way. I think they've done a nice job. because they've enhanced what was already there. That doesn't mean that there aren't some other things that they could have done that they didn't do. I've got a list of those probably that I could give you. But I think they've done a nice job, just like they did when they enclosed the north end zone of Memorial Stadium. I think that looks like it's been there forever, that like it was intended to be. And I think you could say the same thing about the renovations to Assembly Hall, that it looks like it could have been there from the beginning, and it doesn't destroy the feel of the arena. It is a tough place to play. There is something, I think, probably maybe about the sound, the way there are no barriers to the sound. Without having the arches and all of that kind of thing, the sound just goes out there and bounces off the balconies and, reverberates. And during certain games, it's unbelievable how loud it is. You can't talk to the person next to you. It's so loud. It is got to be an intimidating place to play if you're an opposing team. I worked in the building for a very long time, probably 35 years. Not all the tutoring took place in Assembly Hall. We actually had other places on campus that we did tutoring and whatever. But so 35 years is a long time to be in one building, and I wasn't just in one place. That's one thing that was cool about the Assembly Hall, is it was kind of a chameleon, because not an outward chameleon that changes color, but an inward chameleon that changes its purposes. I had at least 7 or 8 different offices in the building in different places. And not all of them were intended to be offices to begin with. It had a lot of little closets and storage areas, and Chuck Crabb is the one who can do the best job of telling you about all of those little places. But we were constantly redoing and recreating ourselves inside Assembly Hall for a very long time, because for many, many years, that was the main administrative building of the whole athletics department. And that's probably the biggest thing that I notice over my time working there, is the size of the department when I started as opposed to the size when I left. I retired at the end of May of 2014, so it's, now been a little while. So the number of people that now work in athletics is at least triple, maybe quadruple what the size was at the time. When I started working athletics, it was more of a family kind of atmosphere. Everybody knew each other better. We were not spread out all over different places, so it was a more family, more intimate kind of atmosphere. Because most of the coaches had offices in Assembly Hall. They knew they were going to run into each other. I think, maybe they were a little closer in that respect at that point in time. We had some very successful coaches. I mean, not just successful at IU, but successful nationally and internationally. Doc Countsman, Hobie Billingsley, Sam Bell, Jerry Yeagley in soccer, along with the basketball. And we had some success in football too at times, not as continued, long-standing success, but there was, I think, a mutual respect among those coaches, and I know that they tried to pick each other's brains and learn from each other, about their tactics and things like that, and that was good. And we also did things more in a family kind of way because we were smaller and we could. Uh, we had Valentine's Days coming up, and we used to have a king and queen contest, little hokey things that we used to do. That they would pick a male and a female from somewhere in the department to be the king and queen of the hearts of the department. We are, for a long period of time, the academic area, which is where I always worked with closely, we had an office down by the court, the basketball court, and it was in the northwest corner. And there were a whole bunch of us people underground. We called ourselves, there were 4 of us female academic advisors, and we called ourselves the Ladies of the Dungeon. There was, the ticket office was downstairs. There were 2 equipment rooms downstairs. There was the concessions people. And at that point in time, everything was totally in-house. There was also the varsity shop, or that name has evolved over time too. There's about 7 or different names that it was over time. But all of us decided that the fancy Christmas party that they were giving us was too fancy and too kind of not fun enough. So we decided that we would stage our own little underground Christmas party where everybody pitched in, and Bill King, the old ticket manager, played Santa Claus. We rented a Santa suit, and he would dress up as Santa Claus, and we just had a lot of fun. And the other people from upstairs would vie for being able to be invited to the underground Christmas party because it was more fun than the one that they had upstairs. So just that kind of fun things that can happen when you're a smaller kind of operation. You know, athletics has turned into a big business, and some of that's good and some of that's not so good. And so those kinds of things are things that, you know, you remember forever, and the people that participated with you in that. It was lots of fun.